My daughter Jessica told me her mother's memorial service was just another guilt trip she didn't have time for. While I stood beside Helen's urn in the scorching Arizona heat, surrounded by people who actually cared, she was networking at some fancy marketing conference in Miami. When she called 3 days later asking why her student loan payments had been declined, my answer was simple. Some things aren't worth my time anymore. She thought I was bluffing. She was about to learn otherwise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix morning sun was already brutal at 8:30, beating down on the Desert View Memorial Gardens with the kind of relentless intensity that makes you question why anyone chooses to live in the desert. I stood beside the memorial pavilion, my phone pressed against my ear for the 7th time in 20 minutes, listening to Jessica's voicemail message with its professionally cheerful tone that had always irritated Helen. "Hi, you've reached Jessica Sullivan Martinez, Senior Marketing Director at Pinnacle Creative Solutions. I'm either with a client or changing the world one campaign at a time. Leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you when my schedule permits." When my schedule permits. Even her voicemail managed to sound condescending. I ended the call without leaving another message and slipped the phone back into the pocket of my black suit jacket, the same one I'd worn to Helen's funeral 6 months ago. The fabric was already beginning to stick to my back despite the early hour. Around me, Helen's friends and former colleagues from the Scottsdale Public Library were arriving in small groups, their faces somber but determined. These were people who had driven across the valley in Saturday morning traffic to honor a woman who had touched their lives. Mrs. Chen from the children's reading program carried a bouquet of desert marigolds, Helen's favorite flowers. Tom Bradley, the head librarian, had organized a collection of Helen's favorite books to display beside her memorial photo. Everyone seemed to understand the importance of being here, except the one person whose presence mattered most. I tried Jessica's number again, this time from my sister Ruth's phone, thinking maybe she was avoiding my calls specifically. The phone rang 4 times before clicking over to that same infuriating voicemail. Ruth squeezed my arm gently, her weathered face creased with concern. "She'll probably show up late," Ruth said, though her voice lacked conviction. Traffic from Sky Harbor can be unpredictable, especially on weekends. I wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that Jessica was simply running behind schedule rather than making a deliberate choice to prioritize something else over her mother's memory. But deep in my gut, I knew better. The pattern had been established long before Helen's death, a gradual pulling away that had accelerated once Jessica landed her high-powered job in Los Angeles. The memorial coordinator, a soft-spoken woman named Patricia, approached with her clipboard and sympathetic expression. "Mr. Sullivan, we should begin seating people soon. The service is scheduled to start in 15 minutes. I nodded, scanning the growing crowd one more time for any sign of Jessica's familiar silhouette. 37 people had come to remember Helen, including several families whose children she had taught to love reading during her 23 years at the library. They deserved to honor Helen properly, not to wait indefinitely for someone who apparently had more important places to be. "Let's begin," I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. As people found their seats under the pavilion's shade, I made one final attempt to reach Jessica. This time she answered on the second ring, but the background noise that filtered through immediately set my teeth on edge. Laughter, clinking glasses, the kind of networking chatter that Jessica thrived on.
"Dad? Hey," she said, her tone bright but distracted. "Sorry I missed your calls. This conference is absolutely insane. The networking opportunities alone are worth the trip." "Jessica, the memorial service starts in 10 minutes. Where are you?" A pause. In the background, I could hear someone calling her name, urging her to come see something. "Oh, Dad, about that. I'm really sorry, but I can't make it. This conference runs through the weekend, and there are some crucial sessions I absolutely cannot miss. You understand, right? Career stuff." The casual dismissal hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the phone tighter, watching as Helen's friends and colleagues settled into their seats, preparing to share memories of a woman who had devoted her life to serving others. "Jessica, this is your mother's memorial service. We planned this months ago." "I know, and I feel terrible about it," she said, though her tone suggested anything but remorse. "But honestly, Dad, it's just going to be a bunch of people sitting around being sad. Mom's gone. Standing around crying isn't going to bring her back." The echo of cruelty in her words was staggering. Around me, people who had loved Helen were preparing to celebrate her life, to share stories that would keep her memory alive, to honor the impact she had made on their community. To Jessica, it was just an inconvenient obligation that interfered with her networking schedule. "Your mother deserves better than this," I said, my voice low but firm. "Look, I'll send flowers, okay? Something really nice, and maybe we can do a private thing when I'm back in town next month." "This conference only happens once a year, Dad. The connections I'm making here could change my entire career trajectory." Before I could respond, she continued, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she used when explaining things to people she considered less sophisticated than herself. "You have to understand, this industry moves fast. If you're not constantly positioning yourself, you get left behind. Mom would have understood that. She always supported my ambitions." The manipulation was breathtaking. Jessica was invoking Helen's memory to justify abandoning Helen's memorial service. Helen, who had sacrificed her own dreams to support Jessica's education. Helen, who had worked double shifts at the library to help pay for Jessica's expensive private college. Helen, who had never missed a single one of Jessica's school events, even when it meant using her own sick days. "I have to go, Dad. There's a panel starting in 5 minutes with some major agency heads. Give my regards to everyone, okay? Tell them I'm thinking of Mom." The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone's blank screen, my reflection distorted in its surface, surrounded by the gentle murmur of people who had actually shown up to honor Helen's memory. Ruth appeared beside me again, reading my expression with the practiced ease of someone who had known me for 67 years. "She's not coming, is she?" I shook my head, unable to trust my voice. The memorial coordinator was moving toward the podium, ready to begin the service that would celebrate Helen's life and impact. These good people deserved my full attention, not the distraction of my disappointment in my daughter. As I took my seat in the front row, the empty chair beside me seemed to mock every sacrifice Helen had made for Jessica. 28 years of putting her daughter first, of believing in Jessica's potential, of making excuses for her increasingly selfish behavior. Helen had died still believing that Jessica would eventually mature into the caring, responsible woman she had raised her to be. The service began with Tom Bradley sharing stories of Helen's dedication to literacy programs, her patience with difficult patrons, her quiet leadership in organizing community events. Each speaker painted a picture of a woman who had given freely of herself, who had measured success not by personal advancement, but by the positive impact she had on others' lives.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I tried to focus on their words, to let their memories of Helen fill the space where my daughter should have been. But my phone, silenced but visible, kept drawing my attention. At some point during the second speaker's tribute, it lit up with a notification, a social media alert from Jessica's Instagram account. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the screen. The preview showed a photo of Jessica in a sleek conference room surrounded by well-dressed marketing executives, everyone holding champagne glasses and smiling at the camera. The caption read, "Amazing keynote session at #MarketingMasters 2024. So grateful for these incredible networking opportunities. Miami, you're treating me well." Posted 18 minutes ago. While Helen's former students were sharing stories about how she had inspired their love of reading, Jessica was posting glamour shots from her networking event. While people who barely knew Helen were taking time from their Saturday to honor her memory,
Her own daughter was celebrating her professional advancement. The contrast was sickening. Jessica's expensive dress probably cost more than most of these people spent on groceries in a month, yet they had found the time and made the effort to be here for Helen. They understood something Jessica had apparently forgotten, that some things mattered more than career advancement, that respect was earned through action rather than words, that love required presence, not just promises. Danny Rodriguez, my longtime friend and former colleague from my electrician days, was speaking now about Helen's volunteer work at the community center, how she had organized reading programs for underprivileged children on her own time. His weathered hands gestured toward Helen's photo as he described her quiet determination to make literacy accessible to everyone. Helen never asked for recognition, Danny said, his voice carrying across the pavilion. She just showed up, week after week, because she believed every child deserved the chance to discover the magic of books. She measured her success not by what she accomplished for herself, but by what she helped others achieve. The implicit contrast to Jessica's values was impossible to ignore. Helen had spent her life lifting others up, while Jessica seemed focused solely on climbing higher herself. Helen had given freely of her time and energy, while Jessica hoarded both for her own advancement. As the service continued, I found myself studying the faces around me. Mrs. Chen, who had driven an hour from Tempe to be here, the Morrison family, whose twin daughters Helen had patiently taught to read during their learning disability struggles. Former library volunteers who had worked alongside Helen for years, organizing book drives and literacy events. These people represented the true measure of Helen's life. Not professional achievements or financial success, but human connections built through consistent care and genuine service. They were Helen's real legacy, the living proof that a life spent helping others created ripples that extended far beyond death. The memorial service concluded with a moment of silence. 37 people standing together in the desert heat to honor a woman who had touched their lives. As they began to disperse, many stopped to share personal memories with me, stories I had never heard about Helen's impact on their families. "She saved my daughter's academic career," whispered Mrs. Patterson, tears streaming down her cheeks. "When Sarah was struggling with dyslexia, Helen spent extra hours working with her, never charging us a penny. Sarah's a teacher now because of your wife's patience." Each story was a gift, a reminder of who Helen truly been beneath the exhaustion and pain of her final months. But each story also highlighted the magnitude of Jessica's absence, the selfishness of choosing professional networking over honoring the woman who had made her success possible. As the last mourners departed, I stood alone beside Helen's memorial photo, her gentle smile frozen in time, surrounded by flowers and books that represented the passions of her life.
The empty chair where Jessica should have sat seemed to summarize our family's current reality. One person absent, one person left behind, and a gulf of values that felt impossible to bridge. The drive home from the Memorial Gardens felt longer than usual, every red light giving me more time to process what had just happened. Jessica's Instagram post kept replaying in my mind, that carefully curated image of professional success, while her mother's friends shared genuine grief just miles away. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for several minutes, staring at the house Helen and I had shared for 31 years. The silence inside was different now, heavier with the weight of Jessica's deliberate absence. I loosened my tie and walked through rooms that still held traces of Helen's presence everywhere. Her reading glasses on the kitchen windowsill, positioned to catch the morning light she loved. The half-finished crossword puzzle on the coffee table, her handwriting filling in words like devotion and loyalty that now felt like accusations. I opened my laptop and navigated to Jessica's social media accounts, something I rarely did but felt compelled to investigate now. The evidence of her priorities was laid out in a digital timeline that told a story Helen had refused to see. While Helen was undergoing chemotherapy last fall, Jessica had posted photos from wine tastings in Napa Valley. During Helen's final weeks, when she could barely keep food down, Jessica was sharing pictures from expensive restaurants across Los Angeles. The pattern stretched back months, even years. Business trips that coincidentally occurred during family holidays, important client meetings that prevented visits home, professional obligations that somehow always took precedence over family events. I scrolled through post after post of Jessica's glamorous life, searching for any mention of her mother, any acknowledgement of Helen's illness or decline. Nothing. Helen's battle with cancer had been invisible in Jessica's carefully constructed online persona. Her mother's death had warranted exactly one post, a generic tribute with a stock photo of flowers and a caption about celebrating the life of an amazing woman. No personal photos, no specific memories, no indication that she had lost someone irreplaceable. But today's conference posts were abundant and detailed. Professional headshots with industry leaders, quotes from keynote speakers about disrupting traditional paradigms, excitement about game-changing partnerships and revolutionary strategies. Jessica had found time to document every moment of her networking success while completely ignoring her mother's memorial service. My phone buzzed with a text message from Ruth. "Beautiful service today. Helen would have been so proud. How are you holding up?" I stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Proud of what? That 37 near strangers had shown more respect for Helen's memory than her own daughter? That people who barely knew Helen understood her value better than the child she had raised? Instead of answering Ruth's question directly, I typed back, "The turnout was wonderful. Helen touched many lives." It was true, but it avoided the larger truth that was becoming impossible to ignore. Helen had touched many lives, but apparently not the one that mattered most to her. The child she had sacrificed for, worried about, and defended until her dying breath had grown into a woman incapable of sacrificing even a weekend for her mother's memory. I walked to Helen's pottery studio in the converted garage, a space she had claimed after retirement to pursue the artistic interests she had postponed during her working years. Dozens of pieces lined the shelves, bowls and vases in earthen tones that reflected her love of the desert landscape. She had been getting good at it, finding joy in creating something beautiful with her hands after decades of helping others create meaning with their minds. Jessica had never shown interest in Helen's pottery, dismissing it as mom's little hobby whenever Helen tried to share her enthusiasm.
The expensive art pieces decorating Jessica's Los Angeles apartment were purchased from galleries, not inherited from her mother's loving hands. Image mattered more than sentiment in Jessica's world. On Helen's workbench sat an unfinished piece, a large serving bowl she had been shaping during her final month. The clay had dried beyond use, cracked and hardened into something that could never fulfill its intended purpose. Like so many of Helen's hopes for Jessica, it had been abandoned before completion. I picked up one of Helen's finished pieces, a small vase glazed in sunset colors that caught the garage's fluorescent lighting. Helen had made it last Christmas, intending it as a gift for Jessica. She had wrapped it carefully and included a note about how the colors reminded her of Jessica's childhood bedroom. Jessica had opened it with polite enthusiasm, set it aside with the other presents, and somehow forgotten to pack it when she returned to Los Angeles. The vase had remained on our kitchen counter for months, a daily reminder of Helen's hope that Jessica might still want tangible connections to her family. Now it felt like evidence of Helen's self-deception, her refusal to acknowledge that Jessica had moved beyond needing or wanting anything her parents could offer. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Danny Rodriguez's name appeared on the screen, and I welcomed the interruption from my increasingly dark reflections. "Frank, hell of a service today," Danny's gravelly voice came through clearly. "Helen would have been touched by all those people showing up." "She would have," I agreed, settling onto the garage's old couch where Helen used to sit while her pottery pieces dried. "Noticed Jessica wasn't there," Danny said, his tone carefully neutral. "Everything okay with her?" The question I had been dreading all day, asked by someone who had known our family for 20 years. Danny had watched Jessica grow up, had attended her high school graduation, had always asked about her career progress with genuine interest. His absence of judgment made the truth easier to share. She was at a conference in Miami, said she couldn't miss the networking opportunities. The silence on Danny's end spoke volumes. Finally, he cleared his throat. A conference. Today? Some marketing thing, apparently more important than her mother's memorial service. Another pause. Frank, I've known that girl since she was 10 years old. Watched Helen drive her to every soccer practice, every school event, every friend's birthday party. Helen never missed anything for Jessica. The contrast was stark and painful. Helen had rearranged her entire schedule around Jessica's needs for 18 years, treating every aspect of Jessica's life as a priority. But Jessica couldn't rearrange one weekend to honor Helen's memory? Helen always made excuses for her, I said, the admission feeling like a betrayal even as I spoke it. Said Jessica was just focused on building her career, that young people need to prioritize their futures. Building a career is one thing, but something should matter more than business. How long since she's been home? I had to think about it, which was answer enough. Christmas, I think. Maybe Thanksgiving? She stayed 2 days and spent most of it on work calls. And during Helen's illness? The question hit like a physical blow. During Helen's 18-month battle with cancer, Jessica had visited exactly 3 times. Each visit had been brief, scheduled around her professional obligations, and filled with obvious discomfort. She had treated Helen's illness like an inconvenience that required management, rather than a tragedy requiring presence. She was busy, I said, automatically repeating Helen's explanation. Her job is demanding. My daughter lives in Seattle, works 60 hours a week at a tech company, has 2 small kids, a mortgage that's killing her. But when her mother-in-law had her stroke last year, Maria was on a plane within 4 hours, stayed for 2 weeks, used all her vacation time. The comparison was devastating.
Denny's daughter, struggling with her own overwhelming responsibilities, had immediately prioritized family crisis over professional obligations. Jessica, with her high salary and flexible schedule, had found every excuse to avoid similar sacrifice. Different people show love differently, I said, though the words felt hollow. Frank, you're a good man, and you are a good father, but some behavior can't be excused away. What Jessica did today, choosing a business conference over Helen's memorial, that's not about different ways of showing love. That's about not loving enough to show up when it matters. The brutal honesty hit home because it came from someone who cared about our family, who had watched Helen pour her heart into raising Jessica, who had witnessed years of Jessica's gradual withdrawal from family connections. Danny wasn't being cruel. He was stating facts that Helen had refused to acknowledge, and I had been too afraid to confront. Helen always believed Jessica would mature, I said. Always thought she'd eventually understand what family means. Maybe she will, but that understanding might need to come through consequences rather than patience. Helen protected Jessica from the results of her choices for 32 years. Maybe it's time Jessica learned what those choices actually cost. After Danny hung up, I remained in the garage, surrounded by Helen's artistic legacy and confronted with the reality of Jessica's emotional absence. For 3 decades, Helen and I had enabled Jessica's selfishness by accepting her excuses, funding her lifestyle, and making allowances for behavior that would have been unacceptable from anyone else. We had told ourselves we were being supportive parents, but perhaps we had simply been afraid of losing Jessica entirely. Every time we had overlooked her thoughtlessness, every time we had accepted her shallow explanations, every time we had prioritized keeping peace over demanding accountability, we had taught Jessica that her convenience mattered more than our feelings. The evidence was overwhelming when viewed objectively. Jessica's student loan payments, which Helen and I had been covering for 6 years at $2,800 per month, the total was staggering when calculated. Over $200,000 we had paid to maintain Jessica's credit score, while she spent her own salary on luxury items and expensive experiences.
Helen had insisted on covering those payments, viewing them as an investment in Jessica's future stability. But Jessica's social media posts revealed a woman who spent more on single dinners than most people earned in a week, who treated designer handbags as routine purchases, who vacationed at resorts that cost more per night than our monthly house payment. Jessica had never asked us to stop making her loan payments, never expressed gratitude for the financial sacrifice, never acknowledged that our assistance had enabled her lavish lifestyle. She had simply accepted our support as her due, while building a life that had no room for the people who made it possible. The automatic payment system made our generosity invisible to Jessica. Each month, $2,800 disappeared from our account into hers, ensuring her financial obligations were met without any effort or awareness on her part. She probably hadn't thought about those loan payments in years, had likely forgotten they existed in any practical sense. But I remembered every payment, every month of dipping into our retirement savings to maintain Jessica's financial freedom. Helen had insisted it was temporary, that Jessica would eventually take over the payments once she felt financially secure. 6 years later, Jessica's security had grown while ours had diminished, but the payments had continued.
The irony was bitter. Helen had sacrificed her own financial security to ensure Jessica's comfort, and Jessica had repaid that sacrifice by missing Helen's memorial service for a networking event. The daughter who owed her financial stability to her parents' generosity couldn't spare a weekend to honor her mother's memory. I walked back into the house and opened my laptop again, navigating to her online banking system. The automatic payment to Jessica's student loan account was scheduled for next Tuesday, just 4 days away. $2,800 that would disappear from our account to maintain Jessica's perfect credit while she built professional connections in Miami. For 6 years, I had watched that money transfer without question, trusting Helen's belief that we were helping Jessica build a stable future. But stability required more than financial assistance. It required character, responsibility, the understanding that obligations extended beyond personal advancement. Jessica had demonstrated today that she possessed none of those qualities. The woman who couldn't be bothered to attend her mother's memorial service had no claim to her parents' continued financial support. The daughter who prioritized networking over grieving had forfeited the right to expect generosity from the family she had abandoned. The payment cancellation screen appeared with a simple question. Are you sure you want to stop this automatic transfer? Below that, smaller text explained, this action cannot be undone. Future payments will not be automatically scheduled. I stared at the screen for several minutes, thinking about Helen's voice during our last conversation about Jessica. She'll understand someday, Helen had whispered. She'll realize what family means when she's older. Perhaps Helen had been right. Perhaps Jessica would understand, but only after experiencing the consequences of her choices. Perhaps the best gift I could give my daughter was the opportunity to learn what Helen had tried to teach her through 3 decades of example. That love required presence, that respect was earned through action, and that some responsibilities couldn't be delegated to other people. I clicked Confirm Cancellation and watched the screen update, Automatic payment canceled, effective immediately. For the first time since Helen's death, I felt something approaching peace. The following morning arrived with the kind of desert clarity that makes everything seem sharper, more defined. I woke before dawn for the first time in months, not from grief-induced insomnia, but from genuine restfulness. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if canceling that automatic payment had lifted a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I made coffee using Helen's favorite mug for myself, something I hadn't been able to do since her death. The ceramic felt warm and familiar in my hands as I sat in the breakfast nook watching the sun paint the Superstition Mountains in shades of gold and amber. Helen had loved this view, had chosen this house partly because of how the morning light transformed the desert landscape into something magical. My phone sat silent on the counter, and the silence felt purposeful rather than empty. No anxious checking for messages from Jessica.
no wondering whether she would call to explain her absence from the memorial service. I had made my decision, and the peace that followed was unexpected. Danny Rodriguez called around 9, his voice carrying the gruff warmth of 40 decades of friendship. "How you holding up this morning, Frank? Yesterday was rough." "Better than expected," I said, surprising myself with the honesty. "Actually slept through the night for the first time since Helen died." "Good to hear. Listen, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about Jessica and all that business with the conference." I poured myself a second cup of coffee and settled back into my chair. Danny had a way of cutting through complicated situations to find their essential truth, a skill developed through 30 years of managing construction crews and dealing with people who tried to avoid responsibility. "I keep thinking about my nephew Marcus," Danny continued. "Remember him? The one who was always borrowing money from his mother, always had some emergency that required immediate financial help?" I remembered Marcus Rodriguez, a charming young man who had drifted from job to job, relationship to relationship, crisis to crisis, always with explanations that made his problems seem like temporary setbacks rather than patterns of poor judgment. "My sister Carmen enabled him for years," Danny said. "Every time Marcus got evicted, she'd pay his rent. Every time he wrecked a car, she'd co-sign for another loan. Every time he got fired, she'd make excuses to the family about how his bosses didn't understand his potential." The parallel to our situation with Jessica was uncomfortably obvious. Helen had made similar excuses, had found explanations for every disappointment, had always been ready with financial assistance when Jessica faced any inconvenience. "What changed?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Carmen got sick. Cancer, like Helen. Suddenly Marcus had to choose between taking care of his mother or maintaining his lifestyle. Guess which one he picked? The story felt like looking into a mirror that reflected possibilities I hadn't wanted to acknowledge. He abandoned her? Worse than that, he kept asking for money even while she was undergoing chemotherapy, told her problems were more urgent than her medical bills because his were immediate while hers were covered by insurance. The casual cruelty was breathtaking, yet familiar. Jessica hadn't asked for money during Helen's illness, but only because the automatic payments had continued flowing without her needing to request assistance. If those payments had stopped, would Jessica have made similar demands? What did Carmen do? Nothing at first. She kept making excuses, kept believing he'd mature eventually. But then Marcus missed her funeral because he was in Las Vegas with friends, said grief was too heavy for him to handle, that he needed to process his loss somewhere positive and uplifting. The echo of Jessica's conference excuse was unmistakable. Different details, same essential selfishness, same prioritization of personal comfort over family obligation. Carmen left him money in her will, substantial amount, enough to pay off his debts and give him a fresh start. You know what happened to that inheritance? He wasted it. Gone in 18 months. Expensive car, luxury apartment, gambling, women who disappeared when the money ran out. Marcus is 43 now, living in a studio apartment, working part-time at a grocery store, blaming everyone except himself for his situation. The cautionary tale was clear, but it raised questions I wasn't sure I wanted to confront. Are you saying I should cut Jessica off completely? I'm saying enabling someone doesn't help them grow. Carmen thought she was protecting Marcus from consequences, but she was actually preventing him from learning how to handle responsibility. By the time she stopped helping, it was too late. He'd never developed the skills to manage his own life. The conversation stayed with me throughout the morning as I tackled tasks I'd been postponing since Helen's death, organizing her medical records, sorting through insurance paperwork, updating bank accounts and credit cards, the mundane business of death that requires attention regardless of grief. In Helen's desk drawer, I found a folder labeled Jessica's Future, filled with financial documents related to our daughter's support. Investment statements showing money we'd moved from retirement accounts to cover Jessica's expenses, tax records documenting thousands of dollars in gifts that exceeded annual limits,
letters from Jessica's loan servicer confirming our payment arrangements. The folder contained 6 years of financial sacrifice, documented in precise detail. Helen had kept meticulous records, tracking every payment, every adjustment to our own budget required to maintain Jessica's lifestyle.
The total was staggering when calculated comprehensively, nearly $300,000 in direct support, plus countless smaller gifts, travel expenses when we visited her, emergency funds for unexpected costs, $300,000 that could have funded Helen's dream trip to Alaska, the renovation of our outdated kitchen, the graduate degree she'd always wanted to pursue. Instead, it had subsidized Jessica's luxury lifestyle while she built a career that apparently left no room for family relationships. Helen's handwriting appeared in the margins of some documents, notes about Jessica's career progress, hopes that financial stability would allow her to focus on personal relationships. Once the loans are paid off, she'll have more time for family. Read one note dated 2 years ago. Success takes sacrifice, but she'll appreciate what we've done once she's established. Helen had believed that Jessica's selfishness was temporary, a phase that would end once professional pressure decreased. But Jessica's behavior had only worsened as her success increased, as if achievement had validated her self-centeredness rather than teaching her gratitude. My phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting my review of the financial records. Ruth's name appeared on the screen. Saw Jessica's conference posts on Facebook. Looks like quite an event. Hope she's planning to call you soon. Ruth didn't know about Jessica's absence from the memorial service. I had avoided mentioning it yesterday, unwilling to explain my daughter's behavior to family members who still believed in her basic decency. But the truth would emerge eventually, and making excuses would only delay the inevitable conversation. I called Ruth back instead of texting, knowing this discussion required more nuance than written messages could provide. "Frank, good to hear from you," Ruth said. "I was just thinking about yesterday's service. Helen would have been so touched by the turnout." "She would have," I agreed, "though I'm not sure she would have understood Jessica's absence." A pause. "What do you mean? Jessica wasn't there?" The question forced me to confront how thoroughly I had concealed Jessica's behavior from family members who still believed she was the devoted daughter Helen had always described. "She was at a marketing conference in Miami, said she couldn't miss the networking opportunities." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Ruth spoke, her voice careful and controlled. "She chose a business conference over her mother's memorial service?" "That's correct." Another pause. "Frank, I don't understand. Helen talked about Jessica constantly, always so proud of her success, always defending her when people questioned why she visited so rarely. Helen made it sound like Jessica was just busy building her career." The gap between Helen's protective narrative and Jessica's actual behavior was becoming impossible to maintain. For years, Helen had crafted explanations that preserved Jessica's reputation while hiding the truth of her indifference. "Helen always saw the best in people," I said diplomatically. "But Frank, a memorial service isn't optional. This wasn't some casual family gathering. This was honoring Helen's life, celebrating everything she meant to people. How could Jessica prioritize business over that?" The question demanded honesty I hadn't been willing to provide while Helen was alive. "Because business is all that matters to Jessica anymore. Her career, her income, her professional reputation. Everything else is secondary." "That's not the Jessica I remember. The little girl who used to help Helen with library programs, who wrote those sweet thank you notes for Christmas presents. What happened to her?" What happened was complex and painful to acknowledge. Jessica hadn't transformed overnight from a caring child to a selfish adult. The change had been gradual, enabled by parents who made excuses for increasingly problematic behavior, who prioritized keeping peace over demanding accountability. "She learned that she could take without giving," I said finally.
We taught her that by accepting her excuses, by covering her obligations, by never requiring her to face consequences for disappointing people. Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of recognition.
You're talking about the student loans, aren't you? Helen mentioned you were helping with those. $2,800 every month for 6 years. Helen insisted it was temporary, that Jessica would take over the payments once she felt financially secure. But she never has. She's never even mentioned them. As far as Jessica knows, those loans just magically get paid every month without any effort or sacrifice on her part. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Ruth asking questions that forced me to confront how extensively Helen and I had enabled Jessica's selfishness. Each example I provided painted a clearer picture of a daughter who had learned to take family support for granted while investing nothing in family relationships. After Ruth hung up, I returned to Helen's financial folder, this time looking for evidence of Jessica's reciprocal generosity. Birthday gifts, holiday presents, contributions to family expenses, any indication that she understood financial relationships should flow both ways. The search was depressing. Jessica's gifts were perfunctory and impersonal, clearly purchased by an assistant or ordered online without thought. Generic flower arrangements on Mother's Day, gift cards for restaurants we never visited, books about retirement planning that seemed more like suggestions than presents. Helen had treasured these minimal gestures, displaying Jessica's cards prominently, mentioning the gifts to friends as evidence of her daughter's thoughtfulness. But viewed objectively, they represented the bare minimum effort required to maintain appearances, not genuine care or consideration. The doorbell interrupted my document review. Through the front window, I could see a delivery truck parked in my driveway, the driver approaching with a large floral arrangement. The timing seemed coincidental until I read the card accompanying the flowers. Sorry I couldn't be there yesterday. Thinking of you and Mom. Love, Jessica. The arrangement was expensive and professionally designed, exactly the kind of impressive display that looked thoughtful without requiring personal investment. Jessica probably ordered it from her phone during a conference break, selecting from premium options that could be charged to her credit card and delivered with minimal effort. The flowers were beautiful and completely soulless, a perfect representation of Jessica's approach to family relationships. Expensive substitutes for presents, purchased solutions to emotional obligations, professional quality gestures that avoided personal sacrifice. I carried the arrangement inside and placed it on the kitchen counter, where its artificial perfection contrasted sharply with the modest desert marigolds Helen's friends had brought to the memorial service. Those flowers had been chosen with care, purchased with limited budgets, given with genuine love. Jessica's arrangement represented everything that was wrong with our relationship. The card included Jessica's business address in Los Angeles, not her personal information, as if this condolence were being sent from her office rather than from her heart. The message itself was generic enough to be applied to any loss, any relationship, any situation requiring socially appropriate sympathy. I threw the card away and left the flowers on the counter. Beautiful and meaningless. A fitting monument to 6 years of financial support that had produced nothing but indifference in return. The student loan payment was scheduled to process automatically in 2 days. $2,800 that would disappear from my account into Jessica's, maintaining her perfect credit while she continued building professional relationships that mattered more than family bonds. But this time the payment would fail. This time, Jessica would discover that support wasn't infinite, that taking required giving, that some relationships could only be maintained through mutual respect and reciprocal care. For the first time since Helen's death, I looked forward to seeing what would happen next. Tuesday arrived with the automated efficiency that characterized modern banking. At precisely 9:15 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank's mobile app. Payment declined. Insufficient authorization for automatic transfer to J. Sullivan Martinez student loan account. The message appeared exactly as scheduled, marking the first time in 6 years that Jessica's loan payment had failed to process.
I stared at the notification with a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity, wondering how long it would take her to notice that her financial safety net had developed a hole. The answer came sooner than expected. By Wednesday afternoon, my phone displayed 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, followed by an increasingly frantic series of text messages from Jessica's personal phone. "Dad, something weird is happening with my student loans. The payment didn't go through and there's some kind of hold on the account. Can you call the bank and figure out what went wrong?" The assumption that I would immediately solve her problem was breathtaking. No acknowledgement of her absence from Helen's memorial service, no apology for prioritizing business over family, no recognition that her financial crisis might be connected to her personal behavior. Just an expectation that I would handle whatever administrative error had disrupted her comfortable arrangement. I let the messages accumulate without responding, curious to see how her tone would evolve as reality penetrated her professional bubble. The escalation was predictable and swift. "Dad, this is urgent. My credit score could be affected if this payment is late. Please call me as soon as you get this. I've been trying to reach you all day. The loan company says there's an issue with the automatic payment setup. This needs to be resolved immediately. Dad, what's going on? I have meetings all day, but this is stressing me out. Can you please just fix whatever banking glitch is causing this problem?" Each message revealed more about Jessica's fundamental misunderstanding of our relationship. She viewed me as a service provider rather than a parent, someone whose primary function was solving her inconveniences while she focused on more important matters. The possibility that I might have agency in this situation, that the glitch might be intentional, never seemed to occur to her. By Thursday morning, Jessica's messages had taken on a sharper edge as the reality of potential consequences began to penetrate her confidence. "Dad, I'm getting notices from the loan company about overdue payments. This is serious. I need you to call me immediately so we can figure out what went wrong with the automatic transfer. I don't understand why you're not responding. This affects my credit rating, which affects my mortgage, which affects my entire financial stability. Please call me back." The progression from assumption to demand was fascinating to observe. Jessica's worldview couldn't accommodate the possibility that her father might have priorities other than maintaining her lifestyle. Her entire adult identity had been built on the foundation of parental support, and cracks in that foundation threatened the structure she had constructed above it. Friday brought the call I had been expecting. Jessica's name appeared on my phone screen during my morning coffee, and this time I answered on the second ring. "Dad, finally," she said, her voice tight with stress and irritation. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days. There's a major problem with my loan payments, and I need you to fix it immediately." "Hello, Jessica," I said, settling back in Helen's favorite chair with my coffee. "How was your conference?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "The conference? It was fine, very productive. But Dad, we need to focus on this banking issue. My loan payment failed, and there's already a late fee assessed to my account."
I see. That must be frustrating for you. Frustrating doesn't begin to cover it. Do you have any idea what this could do to my credit score? I've worked years to build perfect credit, and now there's a late payment because of some computer error? The phrase computer error was particularly revealing. Jessica couldn't conceive that the payment failure might be intentional, that her father might have made a deliberate choice to stop subsidizing her lifestyle. The failure had to be accidental because the alternative was unthinkable. "It's not a computer error, Jessica." A pause. "What do you mean?" "I canceled the automatic payment to your loan account. Permanently." The silence stretched so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, Jessica's voice returned, higher and more strained than before. "You canceled it? Why would you do that without telling me?"
The same reason you attended a conference without telling me you were missing your mother's memorial service. Another pause, this one filled with the sound of Jessica's rapid breathing as she processed the connection between her behavior and its consequences. Dad, that's not fair. The conference was a career opportunity. This is my financial stability we're talking about. And your mother's memorial service was about honoring the woman who made your career possible. Apparently, financial stability matters more to you than family loyalty. That's not true. I sent flowers, I explained about the conference. You can't punish me financially because you're upset about one missed event. The reduction of Helen's memorial service to one missed event was staggering in its callousness. Helen's death, the gathering of people who loved her, the ceremony celebrating her life and impact, all dismissed as a minor scheduling conflict rather than a profound family obligation. This isn't punishment, Jessica. It's consequences. You're 32 years old with a six-figure salary. It's time you handled your own financial obligations. But we had an arrangement. You promised to help with my loans until I got established. You can't just change the terms without warning. The selective memory was remarkable. Jessica remembered my promises, but had apparently forgotten every commitment she had made and broken. Promises to visit more often, to call regularly, to prioritize family during Helen's illness, to attend important family events. I kept my promise for 6 years, Jessica, paid over $250,000 to support your lifestyle while you built your career. But arrangements work both ways. You had obligations too. What obligations? I've been building my professional reputation, creating financial stability, doing exactly what successful people are supposed to do. You were supposed to show up for your family when it mattered. You were supposed to visit your dying mother instead of treating her illness like an inconvenience. You were supposed to attend her memorial service instead of prioritizing business networking. I couldn't handle seeing Mom sick, Dad. It was too painful. And the conference was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. These industry connections could transform my entire career trajectory. The justifications revealed everything wrong with Jessica's value system. Pain was something to be avoided rather than shared. Opportunity was more important than obligation. Career advancement trumped family loyalty. She had learned to rationalize selfishness as self-care, to frame abandonment as ambition. Your mother spent 18 months dying, Jessica. 18 months of chemotherapy, radiation, pain, fear, and hope. She asked about you constantly, made excuses for your absence, believed until the end that you loved her enough to say goodbye. I did love her. I do love her. But standing around watching someone die doesn't help them. I dealt with my grief differently. You dealt with your grief by posting vacation photos on social media while your mother was receiving chemotherapy. You dealt with it by attending marketing conferences while she was asking when you might visit.
You dealt with it by choosing career networking over her memorial service. The accusation hit home because it was factually accurate and impossible to rationalize away. Jessica's social media history provided a detailed record of her priorities during Helen's illness, and that record showed someone who had compartmentalized family crisis to avoid disrupting personal enjoyment. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," Jessica said, her voice taking on the whining tone I remembered from her childhood tantrums. "My industry is incredibly competitive. If you're not constantly advancing, you get left behind. Mom would have understood that." The manipulation was breathtaking. Jessica was invoking Helen's memory to justify behavior that had broken Helen's heart, claiming understanding from the woman she had abandoned in her time of greatest need. Your mother understood sacrifice, Jessica. She sacrificed her own dreams to support yours. She worked extra shifts to pay for your education, used her vacation days to attend your school events, spent her retirement savings to cover your loan payments. But when she needed you, where were you? Building the life she wanted me to have, creating the success she was proud of. Mom always supported my ambitions. She supported your ambitions because she believed they would make you a better person, not a more selfish one. She thought success would teach you gratitude, responsibility, the importance of giving back to people who helped you succeed. I am grateful. I've worked hard to build something meaningful with the opportunities you and Mom provided. Meaningful to whom? Your work serves clients who pay you well, but what do you contribute to the people who actually love you? When was the last time you sacrificed anything for someone else's benefit? The question hung in the air because we both knew the answer. Jessica's adult life had been a masterclass in receiving without giving, in taking support while providing excuses, in building success on a foundation of other people's generosity while contributing nothing to their well-being. This isn't about gratitude, Dad. This is about you being angry that I missed one family event. You're destroying my financial stability because your feelings got hurt. Your financial stability was built on my money, Jessica. Money I earned working 60-hour weeks for 30 years. Money your mother and I saved by living modestly while you lived extravagantly. Money we could have used for our own dreams and needs. You offered to help with my loans. I didn't force you to make those payments. You're right. We offered because we loved you and wanted to help you succeed. But love is supposed to be reciprocal. Support is supposed to create connection, not enable selfishness. So what happens now? You're just going to let my credit get destroyed because I made one mistake? I'm going to let you learn what Helen tried to teach you for 32 years, that choices have consequences, that responsibility can't be delegated to other people, that growing up means handling your own obligations. Dad, please, I'll visit more often. I'll call every week. I'll do whatever you want, but please don't destroy my financial future because of one bad decision. The desperation in her voice was genuine, but it was motivated by fear of consequences rather than recognition of wrongdoing. Jessica was willing to negotiate, to make promises, to adjust her behavior temporarily, but only to restore her financial safety net. She still didn't understand that the problem wasn't her schedule, but her character. Jessica, your financial future isn't destroyed. You have a good job, excellent credit history, and 6 years of payments I made on your behalf. You'll figure out how to handle your own loans, just like millions of other adults do every day. But the payment amount is huge. It'll completely change my budget, my lifestyle, everything I've planned. Then you'll learn to live within your means, instead of within mine. You'll discover what financial responsibility actually feels like when it's your money, instead of someone else's.
What if I can't afford it? What if I have to sell my condo, downgrade my lifestyle, change my entire life plan? Then you'll understand what your mother and I sacrificed to make your current lifestyle possible. You'll appreciate what we gave up to ensure you never had to make those choices. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, Jessica cycling through bargaining, pleading, and anger as she realized that her financial independence was no longer optional. Each argument revealed more about her fundamental misunderstanding of adult relationships, her belief that love meant unconditional support regardless of behavior. Finally, Jessica played her last card. Mom wouldn't have wanted this. She always believed in supporting family, no matter what. You're absolutely right, I said. Your mother did believe in supporting family. She supported you through 18 years of childhood, 4 years of college, 6 years of loan payments, and 18 months of dying while you were too busy to visit. But support works both ways, Jessica, and you've never learned how to provide it. Fine, keep the money. Ruin my life because I made one mistake. But don't pretend this is about teaching me responsibility. This is about revenge. This is about justice, I said. You chose your career over your mother's memory. Now you get to fund your career with your own money instead of hers. I hung up and immediately blocked Jessica's number, watching the familiar confirmation message appear on my screen. For the second time in a week, I had severed a connection that had become toxic, had stopped enabling behavior that dishonored Helen's memory.
The house settled into silence around me, but it was a peaceful silence now. The quiet of decisions made and consequences accepted. Somewhere in Los Angeles, Jessica was probably staring at her phone in disbelief, finally beginning to understand that her actions had permanent results. Helen's pottery vase sat on the kitchen counter beside Jessica's expensive flowers, representing two completely different approaches to love and relationship. One was created with patient hands and given with hope. The other was purchased with effortless money and delivered without thought. For 32 years, Jessica had chosen the effortless path. Now she would discover what effort actually required. 6 weeks passed without a single attempt from Jessica to contact me. 6 weeks of the most profound peace I had experienced since Helen's diagnosis 2 years earlier. The absence of crisis management, financial anxiety, and emotional manipulation created space for healing I hadn't known was possible. I spent those weeks rediscovering routines that had been overshadowed by years of caregiving and worry. Morning walks through the desert preserve where Helen and I used to hike together. Afternoon sessions in her pottery studio where I attempted to learn the craft that had brought her such joy during her final years. Evening phone calls with old friends who had waited patiently while I navigated Helen's illness and death. The Alaska cruise booking confirmed on a Tuesday morning, fulfilling the dream Helen had postponed repeatedly to accommodate family obligations and financial support for Jessica. The Northern Lights expedition she had researched for years, planned in detail, but never experienced because there was always someone else's need taking priority over her own desires. Danny Rodriguez had helped me organize Helen's pottery pieces for a small exhibition at the community center where she had volunteered. Dozens of bowls, vases, and decorative pieces that represented her artistic growth during retirement. Each one a testament to creative potential that had been dormant during decades of putting others first. She would have loved seeing her work displayed like this, Danny said, as we arranged the pieces on tables borrowed from the library. Helen always underestimated her own talent. The exhibition drew a surprising crowd. Former library colleagues, reading program families, neighbors who had admired Helen's garden, people whose lives had been touched by her quiet generosity.
They wandered among her pottery pieces with genuine appreciation, sharing stories about the woman who had created beauty while serving others. Mrs. Chen purchased the sunset-colored vase that Jessica had forgotten to take home from Christmas. "Helen made this for someone special," she said, carefully wrapping it in tissue paper. "It deserves to be treasured." The irony wasn't lost on me. Helen's artistic legacy was being appreciated by near strangers, while her own daughter remained focused on professional networking and career advancement. The people who barely knew Helen understood her value better than the child she had raised and supported. Ruth attended the exhibition with her adult children, who had driven from Tucson specifically to honor Helen's memory. "This is what family looks like," she said quietly, gesturing toward the crowd of people celebrating Helen's life. "Not blood relation, but genuine care and respect." The contrast to Jessica's absence was deliberate and pointed. These people had made time for Helen because they understood what she had meant to their community. They had prioritized relationship over convenience, memory over immediate gratification. My phone remained blissfully silent throughout the exhibition. No crisis calls, no financial emergencies, no requests for intervention in problems Jessica should handle herself. The peace of not being needed as a solution provider allowed me to simply be present with people who appreciated Helen's legacy. The pottery exhibition raised $800 for the library's children's literacy program, money that would fund the kind of work Helen had considered her true calling. Her artistic efforts were generating support for future students, creating a cycle of generosity that honored her values while serving practical needs. A week later, Jessica's name appeared in my email inbox for the first time since our confrontational phone call. The subject line read, "Important family update," with the formal tone she used for business communications. I opened it with curiosity rather than anxiety, wondering what crisis or achievement she considered worth sharing. The message was brief and characteristically self-focused. Jessica had been promoted to Senior Vice President of Strategic Marketing, a position that came with substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. She would be relocating to the company's New York headquarters, a move that represented the culmination of her professional ambitions. "I wanted you to know about this significant career milestone," the email concluded. "The promotion validates everything I've worked toward, and I know Mom would be proud of my success." The assumption that Helen would be proud was remarkable in its tone-deafness. Helen had certainly wanted Jessica to succeed professionally, but she had also wanted her to succeed as a human being, to understand that achievement without character was a hollow victory. There was no mention of Helen's memorial service, no acknowledgement of the loan payment situation, no recognition that professional success might ring hollow when achieved at the expense of family relationships. Jessica had simply moved forward as if the confrontation had never happened, as if cutting ties with her father was a minor inconvenience rather than a profound loss. I deleted the email without responding. Jessica's achievements were no longer my concern. Her career milestones no longer my source of pride or worry. She had chosen her path deliberately, prioritizing advancement over relationship, success over connection, ambition over love. The New York relocation would place Jessica even further from any remaining family ties, both geographically and emotionally. She would build her new life among colleagues and professional contacts who knew nothing about her history of abandoning people who had supported her.
Ruth called that evening, having received a similar email about Jessica's promotion. "She sounds pleased with herself," Ruth said, her tone carefully neutral. "She always does when she gets what she wants. Do you think she'll ever understand what she lost? Not just the money, but the relationship, the connection to family, the respect of people who loved her?" The question had occupied my thoughts since cutting off Jessica's financial support. Would consequences eventually teach her what years of enabling had failed to accomplish? Would she ever recognize that professional success without personal integrity was ultimately empty? "I don't know," I said honestly. "But that's her journey now, not mine." The Alaska cruise departure was scheduled for the following month, a solo adventure that would have been a shared experience if Jessica had shown any interest in honoring her mother's dreams. The Northern Lights expedition Helen had planned in meticulous detail, researched with the enthusiasm she brought to every project, saved money for by living modestly while supporting our daughter's expensive lifestyle. I would carry Helen's memory to the places she had longed to see, fulfilling dreams deferred by decades of putting others first. The trip would cost less than 4 months of Jessica's loan payments, a bargain when measured against the joy it would have brought Helen during her lifetime. My suitcase contained Helen's favorite photograph, the one from our 25th anniversary trip to Sedona, where her smile captured the happiness that had defined our marriage. She would see the northern lights through my eyes, experience the Arctic landscape through my presence, finally achieve the adventure that family obligations had repeatedly postponed. The house felt lighter as departure approached, unburdened by the weight of maintaining relationships that drained rather than nourished. Jessica's expensive flowers had been thrown away weeks ago, their artificial beauty replaced by desert marigolds from Helen's garden that bloomed with authentic life. Danny Rodriguez would check on the house while I traveled, watering Helen's plants and collecting mail with the reliability that characterized true friendship. Ruth would monitor my journey through daily check-ins, providing the family connection that Jessica had abandoned for professional advancement. The morning of departure arrived with desert sunrise that painted the mountains in shades Helen had tried to capture in her pottery glazes. I loaded my suitcase into the truck and took one final walk through the house where Helen and I had built our life together. Her reading glasses remained on the kitchen windowsill, positioned to catch morning light she would never see again. Her crossword puzzle book lay open to puzzles she would never complete. Her pottery studio held pieces she would never finish, dreams interrupted by death but not destroyed by neglect. Jessica's childhood bedroom had been converted into Helen's art space years ago, easels and canvases replacing trophies and photographs that had once documented our daughter's achievements. The transformation symbolized our family's evolution, artistic creation replacing athletic accomplishment, present joy replacing past glory. The drive to Phoenix Sky Harbor took me through neighborhoods where Helen had taught, communities where her influence lingered in former students who had learned to love reading, families who still remembered her patience and dedication. Her legacy lived in human connections rather than professional achievements, in lives touched rather than goals accomplished. At the departure gate, I opened Helen's travel journal, to pages covered with Northern Lights research, accommodation reviews, excursion plans developed with characteristic thoroughness. She had dreamed of this journey for years, postponed it repeatedly for family needs, planned it carefully despite knowing she might never make the trip. The flight attendant's announcement interrupted my reading. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Alaska Airlines Flight 127 to Anchorage. We're pleased to have you traveling with us today for what promises to be an unforgettable journey."
Unforgettable seemed exactly right. Helen's dreams would finally be realized, her sacrifices honored, her memory celebrated in landscapes she had studied but never seen. The Northern Lights would dance for both of us, validating decades of love that had prioritized others over self, relationship over ambition, connection over success. As the plane lifted off from Phoenix, I watched the desert landscape shrink below, carrying me toward adventures that Helen had made possible through years of quiet sacrifice. Somewhere in New York, Jessica was probably networking at another professional event, building career connections that mattered more than family bonds. But that was her choice, her path, her consequence to navigate. I was finally free to honor Helen's memory by living the dreams she had deferred, experiencing the joy she had postponed, celebrating the love that had sustained us through 4 decades of marriage. The Northern Lights were waiting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.